This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. My guest today comes from podmatch.com. No, that's not a city, everybody. It's
Mm.
it's an organization that we belong to. Her name is Valerie Greene. And when I read your bio, Valerie, I stopped on the first sentence and I didn't go back and reread the whole thing until after you accepted to be on the show. And what I noticed is that you talk about transforming conflict. And I grew up in a home that my parents would have described it as, oh, no, there's no conflict. But my parents were the Bickersons. They would argue back and forth, they'd hug and kiss, it was over. But I held it all in. In fact, as I got older, I remember going to my parents and saying, do you really love each other? And they looked at each other and said, well, what are you talking about? Of course we do. And I said, then why do you argue with each other? They looked at each other and said, are we? They had no
Wow.
concept of what they were doing and how it affected at least me. So, how did you get into this role and give us your backstory?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, wow. I mean, I feel really touched by what you just shared that, it sounds like you, like I am an empath. And even though your parents weren't aware of the fact that they were using confrontational language with each other, and therefore you could feel like they didn't feel like they were on the same team, but they weren't aware of that, but you could feel that. And you felt confused about, do you even love each other? Why are you talking to each other that way? And that was actually similar to my experience. Um, so I want to just tell you that I really feel a lot of empathy for the impact on you as well. And of course, we can go back and forth
Sure.
about that. I know you asked me about me, so I'm happy to talk about me, but I just want to share that I think this
Thank
is
you.
actually a very common phenomenon in our culture. Because I don't have a philosophical or historical origin story about when it happened. I mean, we don't have to get philosophical. My guess is it happened a long time ago, where maybe the Industrial Revolution, I don't know, but people stopped valuing paying attention to feelings. It might have been when agriculture started 10,000 years ago. I don't know. But regardless, when we're in survival mode, we don't have room for feelings. And, our culture has been in survival mode, like, ad nauseum, right? So it's like, we don't need to talk about that. But what I want to talk about is that, I mean, my parents were very loving, and they too had absolutely no clue that they were using confrontational language. And my theory for that is just because my mom was born at the end of World War II in Poland. So obviously there's not room for feelings. She came here on a boat when she was 3. There's no room for feelings there.
Right.
It's survival mode. My dad had an abusive childhood. There was no room for feelings. And so they did their best. They provided these structures for me that they thought I needed to feel happy, but there was no, and when I was really little, my dad, because he knew that he didn't have good parenting himself, he did his best to read all the parenting books that were around in the late 70s when I was born. Um, and they said, validate the child's feelings. So when I was really little, I got my feelings validated. But then when I developed a personality, it was too much for him and he stopped being able to do that. And so it was extremely confusing. So, like, after the age of 3, there was no validation of feelings. It's just like, do this because I say so, do this because you have to. What's wrong with you that you're not doing it? And then they would argue in front of me and with me without acknowledging, right? So, same thing, right? It's like I was only taught confrontational language after that, which is, why aren't you doing this? What's wrong with you? Do it because I say so. We're not arguing. What are you talking about? Everything's fine, right? Same thing. But I'm not blaming them, right? And that's the important part, is that um they didn't have any awareness of what empathy was. They were doing their best following the parenting books, but they
Right.
didn't have the support to implement it. So there's no blame here, right? But at the same time, I was also raised very, my dad was extremely highly conscious as well. He was a meditator and he was really into Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer. So there was just no awareness of feelings, but he was always very empowering. Um, and that was also kind of confusing for me because it was kind of Jekyll and Hyde. But regardless, because of that, I always was modeled. Like he said some very wise things to me too, such as relationships are never stagnant. They're always either growing closer or farther apart, and you have to be doing things to take care of each other. And I think both of my parents' love languages was acts of service because they really did things to take care of each other and modeled that for me. So I grew up with this incredibly disjointed idea of relationships. On the one hand, there are things that we could do to make it better. And on the other hand, I'm not learning any of those things, and everything I do to try to create relationships, especially with my peers, isn't working because in the part of him that was highly evolved, I was raised incredibly different than other kids. I wasn't. I was raised eating a natural hygiene diet that was just protein and vegetables and whole grains. And I was educated that corporations were exploiting people with putting sugar and addictive things into the food. And by the way, no education not to tell other kids that sugar is bad for them. Um, and I wasn't allowed to listen to the music other kids were listening to, the same violent cartoons they were watching. I had no way to connect with other kids. So I was heavily bullied. And on top of being heavily bullied, no emotional support with dealing with that. Just suck it up, be nice to them.
Yep.
So it's like everything that I was wanting, everything that I tried to connect with other people didn't work and got me feeling like I can't be vulnerable or it'll be used against me. I have to just act strong and pretend like everything's fine. And so that was my personality. And so when I'm in my 20s, I'm kind of acting because in high school, I figured out how to make friends and, have fun and, but it was through suppressing my emotions and just pretending like I'm cool and everything's fine and I'm trying to fit in. And, I'm imagining you probably have some similar stuff going on with, most people do.
Well, I think a lot of us go through high school exactly like that. Even those that we look at and say, "Oh, look at them. They just fit in perfectly." And I will say that Facebook has reunited me with a lot of my high school friends, and they saw me as the confident one, and I thought they were the confident ones. And so, if you don't have a way to talk about this,
right,
because you're supposed to be confident because that's going to get you friends and whatever else you need. So you don't dare say, "Hey, I'm an imposter."
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, that's exactly who I was. I was an imposter. I was luckier than you in many ways that even though my parents had this bickering amongst themselves, there was a lot of support and love and direction in the home. I'm sure there were things, if I really want to go back and think about it, that they didn't allow me to do or didn't want me to do. But it doesn't sound like the way you were brought up. And again, your parents did what was best for you in their roles. And that's what all parents do.
Exactly.
We do our best. And sometimes our kids will come back and tell us when they grow up, I don't think that was best for me. And it's like, well, I did what I had to do.
Exactly. And I mean, it's so fascinating because, and thank you for sharing that. And I mean, of course, I want to say there was a lot of support as well. I don't want to misrepresent my parents. They give me a lot of support, just not emotionally, because they just didn't really know how to give emotional support, but they give as much possible support and guidance as they could in other ways. But that like now one of my niches, and we can get to how I help people resolve conflict, because it basically, this whole experience I had growing up, it created an insatiable drive to learn how to resolve conflict in me, because I remembered how safe emotionally I felt from like 0 to 3, because there was empathy and acknowledgement of feelings that we all had before I started resisting. And even in the terrible twos, I remember my parents acknowledged my feelings. And it's just because I didn't have conflict with other kids yet. It was like I went to nursery school and I could feel like everyone was being raised differently than me and I couldn't handle it. And then I just shut down, and then they were not able to support me emotionally. And that's when it started that I felt controlled and manipulated and punished and all of that. But that doesn't mean that was their intention.
Right.
But anyway, because I knew what it felt like prior to that, because I'm one of those rare people that remembers all the way back to my birth. It's strange. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't remember everything, of course, but I have a lot of memories of what it was like from 0 to 2 and how emotionally safe I felt. And so that was my template. And I'm like, but I don't have any conscious wiring for how to do that. We don't have any conscious skills that we learned from that age. So
Right.
in my 20s, I was just like, okay, um, I don't want to be controlled, because I felt really controlled growing up. I'm just going to pick men that are more easygoing and kind of let me control things. But then, of course, I didn't know how to be in my feminine energy at all, which we can touch on if you want to. And so I got controlling, because that was my programming. I either knew how to be controlling or be controlled. And so then I would use confrontational language because that's all I knew. And like I'd sweep conflict under the rug and everything's fine until, why didn't you do this? And I thought we agreed on that. And what's happening? And it's like you can hear my tone of voice. Like I was getting controlling, and because that's all I knew. And so of course then my exes would get defensive, and then we'd be arguing, and we get in these cycles of conflict. And when I'm in a cycle of conflict, I didn't have any skills back then for how to resolve it, other than getting defensive or trying to get him to see my point of view and making him wrong, right? Now, of course, I know that those are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to John Gottman, of course. Yeah. But back then, hindsight is 2020. I'm 46 now, so we're talking about, all throughout my 20s, and even in my marriage to my first husband, those patterns came out. I mean, they do now too with my current husband, but of course now I know how to catch them and repair and do something different, which I'll talk about, because it's not about being perfect. None of this is about being perfect. It's knowing how to repair when you're not perfect.
And I don't think anybody can be perfect. I'm going to be honest about that. That there are different things that trigger us both physically and emotionally, and it causes that change in our personality.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know for myself, especially for the last 6 months, I broke my arm on Christmas Eve. So it changed all of our holiday plans.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
I felt terrible about it.
of
But at
course.
the same time, I guess I'm going to say I wanted sympathy. And I got support, but I didn't feel the sympathy. And so,
Yeah.
I, instead of coming out and saying what I needed, I didn't. I was holding it in, and I was getting angrier as weeks went on. And then I started physical therapy, and I thought, oh, this is fine. I'm going to be able now to really move my arm. And it's like I'm still in physical therapy. And yes, I can move it, but I'm never going to have the same range of motion. And so
Oh,
for the last 6 months, I have felt myself on this roller coaster. And a couple of weeks ago, it came to a head. And I used every word that I didn't want to use in trying to explain it. Um, I cried. I, if I could have found something to destroy that I wouldn't have missed, I probably destroyed something, but it was always my computer, my monitors, and everything else around me. And it's like, no, can't
right.
do that. Um, and that's when it hit me that a lot of this is physical pain coming out, and it's coming out in my words. And I'm not using, you know, I'm not, I'm conscious of what I'm doing, but I'm not being conscious of saying, whoa, you can stop this. Find your toolbox. And 2 weeks ago, I did. Finally, I was sitting here alone in my office, and it was like, wait a second, go dig through it. What's in there? Why are you feeling this way? And luckily, I was home alone. My husband was on a business trip, and I took that whole day to really outwardly talk to myself here in the house until I realized this is what it is. I've lost part of me this year. And when I look in the mirror, I don't see it. Most of the time, I don't feel it. But deep down inside, I'm feeling it because my range of motion is never going to come back. And so it was like, okay, but you know what? You still can do 90% of what you were doing before. The only thing I can't do is pull my hair back. My arm just doesn't want to go that way. And so I'm going to teach my husband how to pull my hair back, you know.
That'll be a way for you to connect. But of course, I agree. It's important to take the time out to feel your feelings and to know why you did that and to know what you need and to acknowledge your reality, to forgive yourself for how you've been acting and recognize, oh, I've been acting this way because I've actually needed to express these feelings and to be heard.
So you realized by the time you were in your 20s and probably earlier that there was a lot of conflicting beliefs going on around you as you were growing up. You were seeing your parents loving each other and you saw the confrontation. They were keeping you from doing certain things that you wanted to do. So that was conflict for you. What was it in college that made you realize, hey, if I study this, I can do this. And if I do this, I'm going to start liking myself a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did study psychology in college, but I didn't major in it. I minored in it. So it wasn't in college. I actually had, I'm still friends with the boyfriend that I had in college. Um, and he's a sweetheart. And I didn't recognize, yes, we got caught in patterns of conflict, but we were like 19 to 22. Yeah. Like I wasn't conscious enough back then. It took repeated patterns in my 20s where it was like same pattern, different relationship for me to realize I was the common denominator. So it was around when I was like 25 and I broke up with the boyfriend that I was with then. And I recognized like, wait a minute, why are my relationships so fraught with conflict? And I need to figure this out. I need to know how I'm the common denominator. I need to know what to do different. And so that's when I started studying relationship teachers. I studied with many, 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 many different relationship teachers. The most well-known over the years are Susan Johnson and John Gottman. And I love the teachings of Stan Tatkin. I haven't trained with him directly. I mean, I took the emotionally focused therapy training. I didn't study with Sue Johnson directly. I did John and Julie Gottman's training over video, but it was their comprehensive level 1 and 2 training. And I studied nonviolent communication and a lot of emotional healing tools. And I really use those in the trenches in my own relationships. And also, I took my first coaching training in 2005 when I was 27. And that was so informative to me because I was still at that time working through these patterns in my own relationships. I was learning how to be more vulnerable rather than to complain. And what I was going to say to you earlier is it sounds like, because it's not unhealthy, it's very healthy to cry. But there's a difference between victim vulnerability, which it sounds like you had to kind of talk yourself out of, versus empowered vulnerability. And I had to learn the difference. Like victim vulnerability is like, poor me, why is this happening to me? I feel so helpless. And it's not like it's bad to feel that way, but we need to know how to self-regulate when we feel that way.
Exactly.
Is, the tools that you're talking about, which is the prerequisite to showing up in a conscious way when we're in conflict. which is to have empowered vulnerability, which is to say, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm needing. And what are you feeling and what are you needing? And how can we work this out together? I had to learn how to do that. I had to learn how to challenge my limiting beliefs that I'm wrong or the other person's wrong that lead to me feeling shame. Um, I had to learn how to actually be present with emotions and that feelings are not bad. They're actually a signpost that lead us to our deeper needs and what is it that I need, and that there's a lot of different ways to get that need met, not just one, so I don't have to be controlling about it. So I was putting all this into practice in my relationships. I didn't really feel ready to be a relationship coach yet. I started out as a health coach. I went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition because that's how I was raised, was eating a really, really healthy whole foods diet. So it was like I was still very passionate about that. But so people and I did workshops on like how to give up sugar and how to stop emotional eating and all of that. And I got clients that way. And so people would come to me to learn how to live a healthy lifestyle. But then when I actually was coaching them, what wound up being what we focused on was their relationships. That's just what it turned into. And so it's like it was hit like kind of like staring me in the face like, this is your skill. And then eventually I worked with a business coach who had me look at, when clients come to me, what's their problem and what's the biggest benefit they get through working with me. And it was just sort of staring me in the face that like the biggest shift that I helped to create with them is in their relationship. So I finally had to own it, even though I didn't want to, because at that time I got married and we were having problems with my ex-husband. And so it was like, I don't want to be a relationship coach. I want to do something else. Let me do something else. I'm still working this out in my own life. And it was tough. But in my marriage with my ex-husband, and he and I are still friends too, that's when I really learned this. Really, really, like I actually hung a sheet of feelings and needs on my wall. And when we were arguing, I would take a time out and I would go look at the sheet and I would do my inner work to be able to give myself empathy for my feelings and needs, and then guess what he was feeling and needing, and then come back to the conversation and say, okay, are you feeling upset because you're needing more empathy from me? Okay, what do you need from me and how can I give it to you? And then how can I ask you to empathize with me? And then we would have these connected conversations instead of arguing. And that's how I really, really learned how to implement these tools and stop arguing. And it was really gut wrenching and heart wrenching because we actually spent 2 years having these really emotionally connected, authentic conversations from 2011 to 2013. And we actually worked with a lot of relationship coaches and therapists ourselves with my ex-husband to implement these tools, to have these connected conversations, to realize that we actually wanted different things out of marriage. And he wanted one thing, I wanted another thing. And we realized that we work better as friends, and we transitioned into a friendship such that when we actually got divorced, it was the most amicable process ever. Amicable. We like didn't disagree on anything. We signed the paperwork. We went out to dinner and saw a movie afterwards. So
all divorces should be that way.
right. I even remember what we saw Despicable Me. It was in the theaters then, in 2013. And that was 12 years ago. Then I met my current husband in 2015. And so we've been together for 10 years. And of course, and it's funny though, because it's like when I met him, I didn't realize, I mean, I did realize, he didn't realize what that meant, that he's my imago. Okay. I actually told him that on our first date. I'm like, you're my imago, so you're gonna bring up all my dad's stuff. And he's like, okay, that's cool. Like he didn't really know what that meant. I'm okay helping you with your dad's stuff. But a lot of times nowadays he's like, there's so much projection going on that I feel like I'm a movie screen.
Yeah, I love that.
But because I have all these tools, especially how to repair, which I think is the most important tool, because none of us can show up perfectly like you're talking about. But what we can always do is repair.
How does it work when there's a couple that truly are not on the same wavelength? Okay. Um, my husband and I are now married 41 years. This is his first marriage, my second marriage. Um, and I walked in with a lot of baggage. It was, you know, I didn't have any of the support that I needed in my first marriage. And I look back and I'm so grateful that my ex husband initiated the divorce. I can say that all these years later. At first, I blamed him. It's got to be your fault.
Of
But
course, yeah, because it was painful, I'm sure.
my current husband is a very laid back, like he doesn't share a lot of feelings other than, he's constantly telling me he loves me. He'll tell me that I'm attractive, all those things. Okay. But when I try to tell him that something is bothering me and I try to discuss it with him, it's like, okay, if that's what's bothering you. Up until a couple of years ago, that led me into conflict. I would just, you don't understand. And why don't you understand? Now I look at it, okay, it's all he can absorb.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what can I do to make myself feel more comfortable in the situation? And that's when, I started taking more classes and realizing that it's more about me than him. He's doing what he
Mm-hmm.
can do. But if you would have told me that even 20 years ago, I would have looked at you and said, no, he's got to do more.
Mm.
But you can't make somebody have the feelings that you want them to have.
Right. No, exactly. And that's such a beautiful example. And I mean, of course, if I was coaching you, I would um help not help, because I know you're not asking for advice here. But we would unturn rocks to see what authentic relating skills you could use to guess what he's experiencing and have him validate his experience so that he could learn to open up more so that then he could do the same for you. But of course, you're probably already doing that. I'm just demonstrating what I do with my clients.
Luckily, that is what I'm doing. And then I can go back to him after I have sort of figured it out. And if I tell him this is what I need, 99% of the time, I will get that.
Exactly.
But again, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the man was supposed to be
Right.
He's supposed to know everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Instead, we have basically reversed the roles because that's the type of person he is. It's like, no, you know everything, but it's taken me all this time to finally realize it's okay. We each have our part. And so the conflicts are not like they once were.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the exercises that you give your clients when they come in? Because I would assume that sometimes they come in, one is really dragging the other person.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Or a lot of times I do work with just the person. That's I actually have four niches and one is couples. I love working with couples. But I have another niche just working with one person, usually the woman. Although I've also just worked with the man. And I do respect all gender variation. So I'm not saying those are the only two genders,
Right.
but and I've worked with transgender people as well. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'll just say sometimes I work with only one partner, usually the partner identifying as a woman, and usually that's a heteronormative cisgender woman. My typical client is like in her 30s to 50s, who identifies as a woman, and in her 30s, she's either wanting to meet a man and have a family, or is in a marriage where they're embroiled in conflict and she doesn't want to get a divorce. She wants to fix it. Um, and I also do sometimes see the man in that case. But regardless, the tools are exactly what we've been talking about. I love that you've been sharing your own examples as well, because it always comes back to us doing our inner work, like you're saying. Which is And this is what I do in my current relationship, which is why my current marriage is so wonderful, even though, like I said, sometimes he feels like a projection, but he knows how to say that.
Yeah.
So we actually met in the authentic relating community. And so that's a huge advantage because those are basically the skills that I teach. It falls under the umbrella of authentic relating skills. What does that mean? Um, I mean, authentic relating is a movement that was created in San Francisco back like in the early 2000s. My husband happened to be trained by the founders. So that he likes to say he's OG. But it comes out of many different aspects of um, both Gestalt work and nonviolent communication, among many other modalities. But regardless, what it means is that I have the ability to slow down, to pay attention to not believing the story I'm telling myself in my head, but getting curious about, is that true? What is also likely to be true? Um, there are many different ways of seeing it. Here's my way. What's the other way? I'm going to get curious about his way of seeing it, not just mine. I like to use the analogy in that case of the three blind men and the elephant. Not sure if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
But just for the gist of it for listeners, three blind men want to know what an elephant looks like, and one of them is on the trunk and thinks it looks like a hose, and the other one's on its leg and thinks it looks like a tree trunk, and the other one's on its tail and thinks it looks like a broom, and they're arguing, right? But it's like, who's right? Is that they're all right from their unique perspectives, but no one's right because they don't see the big picture. And so I always keep that analogy in my head and tell that to my clients, is like, can you validate their point of view, even if you have a different point of view? Because that's what we need in order to feel safe. So I'm actually going to talk about the three brains here because, triune brain theory is pretty well accepted at this point. We have our amygdala, which is in charge of keeping us safe, safety versus danger. We have our limbic system, which is in charge of, this is where our attachment system is. This is like when we need to feel connected. These are where all of our needs for connection come in. And then we have our cerebral cortex, which is the newest brain that needs to feel like our thoughts make sense. And so we get triggered if we don't have what each of these three brains needs. We need to feel safe, we need to feel connected, and we need to know our thoughts make sense in order to stay present in a conversation. And so the blind men and the elephant is the analogy I have in my head when I'm like, okay, your point of view makes sense. I need you to validate my point of view makes sense, so we can drop into feelings and needs and feel connected. So with the tools with dropping into feelings and needs, I need to know that I can handle how my feelings feel as a sensation on my body. That I have some kind of mindfulness practice where I'm not needing to get rid of this feeling because it's just, I can't handle it anymore. It's like, that's what it feels like to be in fight, flight, freeze mode. And it's about self-regulation tools. For me, I use body scan meditations, and that's what I teach to my clients. Like, how is your breathing? How are you feeling that as a sensation in your body? I also use inner child work. Like, if there's a strong voice in your head that says this isn't fair and you're not ready to challenge the limiting beliefs, it's like, what would you tell a child who said that to you? You'd pick her up and you'd validate her point of view. It's not fair from your point of view. What did you need? So then it's like you really validate your own feelings and needs. And I give clients a cheat sheet of feelings and needs. I take it from nonviolent communication because it's actually a really easy cheat sheet. Because the research shows that when you label feelings, that allows you to not have to just get rid of them. If you're able to actually give yourself empathy for your feelings, of like, I'm feeling angry, but I can validate my feeling of anger, then I don't have to go around wanting to throw things like you were saying earlier, because I feel that way sometimes too. But if I don't validate my feelings, I feel like I want to destroy things. Like it can be that loud. And so it's like I had to learn how to validate my anger and validate my needs and feel it as a sensation in my body, and ask myself, what do I need? Do I need to feel heard? Do I need to feel understood? But first of all, I need to get that need met by myself so that I can then have the empathy to be able to ask myself, what is he feeling and needing? Because it's not until I can ask myself, what is he feeling and needing, and even be able to guess and be curious that I'm ready to talk to him about it.
Got it. You
So
know,
that's what I had to learn, and that's what I teach my clients, but it's
I
not
love
easy.
it. I took an emotional intelligence course 3 years ago, and we're going to start a boot camp and go a little bit further next month, which I'm really excited about because it helped me really identify, you know, who I am, why I do the things I do, and not blame myself. Just say, okay, that's why you do it. If you don't want to do that, you've got to figure out a way to, turn the corner and not do that.
Mhm.
But one of the things that the coach uh, would bring up so many times is, how is that working for you? And when I was going through this time period in the last 6 months, I was sitting here right before a podcast and I just kept thinking, I don't have the energy for this, and it's too late to cancel it. What's going to happen? And I know myself well enough. I can feel that way, but as soon as my guest comes on, I'm in it. Okay. But I took a little sticky right before that happened. And on it, I wrote, how is that working for you? And put it up on the computer, thinking that if that guest came on and I truly did not feel I could do the podcast, I had the energy at that point to be able to be honest and vulnerable and explain why. And that really has been a huge turning point for me and has helped me with my clients because a lot of times, it's a weekly session and the client comes on and, oh, I have nothing to talk about today. That's great. And as soon as I say, how is that working for you? Right away, it comes out. Um, and I do it a lot to myself if I'm having a conflict, whether it be with my husband or with my sons or somebody else. If I feel getting into there, it's like ingrained in my brain. How is it working for you? And 99% of the time, I realize it's not working. I got to throw that switch. And, you know, I've learned that it's okay to apologize, to say,
Yes.
hey, I let my brain get ahead of my tongue. And so, or my tongue ahead of my brain, whichever way. And I am sorry. I'm going to pull back. So, but it's not easy. You've got to get the guidance to do all this.
Yes.
People can do it on their own. What do you think?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I had to take pretty much continuous trainings like for over 10 years in order to develop the skills to support other people. Obviously, I don't think other people need to do that amount of work. I mean, because this is my career. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it without being taught myself. And of course, now I teach others. And I love what you just said. I mean, for many reasons, that you learned how to be authentic with your feelings and needs and where you're at. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And it does take, in my opinion, teachers to teach us how to do that. And that you're able to then say, hey, I made this commitment and I need to change it in collaboration. Which, I mean, I want to piggyback on that with what I said with repair, because that's really where I want to sort of bring this full circle is that, I mean, I want people to know I'm not perfect either. I of course, have a wonderful relationship with my husband now that's so connected and so passionate and so heart centered. And we're actually teaching a live workshop in Brooklyn in a couple of weeks. I don't know when you when you are releasing this, but we actually love teaching together. We don't do it often, but I just feel so blessed to be with somebody who embodies this consciousness with me. And at the same time, I'm not perfect and I had to learn how to repair. And saying I'm sorry is just the first step in repair. And most people don't know how to repair on a deeper level. And there's basically three components that go into a repair, because it's like, I want to present these skills to teach people how to transform conflict into intimacy, which is what I just shared, doing the inner work of getting to your feelings and needs and validating his feelings and needs and creating win-win solutions, right? Like that's the paradigm. But then I'm not always good at that. Nobody's always good at that. If we're not good at that, we need to know how to repair, which is three things. Number one, acknowledging what happened, owning my unskillful behavior. Um, I made you wrong there. I didn't stay in my circle there. I didn't use I statements there. I got defensive there. I take responsibility for that. That's the first aspect of a repair, is owning the unskillful behavior, not just saying I'm sorry. Maybe the other person needs to hear sorry, but that's not specific enough for most people. They need to know what exactly you're saying sorry for, and then acknowledging the impact and giving empathy for the impact. That's step number two. Because it's only if we're in conflict, if you feel that I'm really empathizing with what it was like for you, what you were feeling, giving you empathy for your feelings. Oh my gosh, that was so hard. That was so hurtful. You felt so hurt in that moment. What was that like for you? Oh my gosh, I care. And I feel moved by your pain without me feeling so guilty that I can't do it, which is the hardest part of this. But it's not until I can do that that your nervous system is going to think that I care deeply and am not likely to do it again, and that you'll be able to let it go fully. And that's what most people don't understand. And I didn't understand. I used to just be one of those people that were like, what? I apologize. Why can't you just let it go and move on?
Yes.
And the third component is that we need to brainstorm or be clear about what is going to happen differently next time. What are we learning from this? If there's something I did that hurt your feelings and it's because I got triggered, what am I going to do when I get triggered next time instead? Rather than doing that, so that we build trust. And that's not easy to do. I teach my clients that too, but I mean, it's because I have those skills now that, because my husband is my imago, and sometimes I do argue with him like I did with my dad, and then realize, oh my God, I was projecting my dad onto him and I didn't see him at all. And then I have to go back and validate his point of view and apologize for what I did and empathize with his feelings and work it in myself. Like, next time, here's what I'm going to do instead. And then we need to have a few days of me doing that instead for him to trust me again, and vice versa, right? He repairs with me too and earns my trust back when we argue. So I don't want you to think we're arguing all the time. Of course, we're talking about conflict in this interview, but it's like, I just don't want to leave you feeling like you need to be perfect, otherwise you're screwed, and you need to learn these skills, otherwise you're screwed. It's like, the most important skill to have is repair.
It's interesting because if I sit back and talk about conflict, I probably could tell you at least a dozen times a day where I'm feeling it. But overall, it's very minute. One example would be my husband's been on a project for the last month. So he's back home and he's in between projects. So he's here while I'm working. But this morning, he went down for breakfast. So did I. The dishwasher had to be empty. And I saw it. He didn't. He didn't pay any attention to it. And as I was emptying the dishwasher, my first reaction was, can't believe he hears me in here. He's not doing it. And I stopped that thought pattern and was like, I heard myself saying, Karen, if you want him to do it, just ask him. And I thought, no, I can do it. It's not a big deal. And those are things that I didn't know how to do before.
Right.
I'd be slamming the silverware for him to hear it, and then he'd say, what are you mad about? And then, I blame him for not doing it. I know there are certain things he does not notice. If I tell him about it, he'll do it. Right. And it took me almost the 41 years that we're married to figure this out. So for our listeners out there, you know, any little thing can be a conflict. And if we let it build, then it becomes a problem. And if you can find the tools that you need, start with the coach, start reading up about conflict, um, and identify your part in it.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I never wanted to do. I always wanted to blame somebody else for the conflict.
Yeah, it feels so much better in the moment than to blame someone else. Of course, it feels worse in the moments after, but it feels so good in the moment.
So I know you're in New York. Do you do any kind of coaching online? So if any of our listeners are interested.
Yes, my practice is online. It's all virtual. I work with people all over the world, so it's very fulfilling actually to work with people from different cultures. But I mean, the bulk of my clients are in the U.S. And I work over Zoom usually or phone. Some clients prefer phone. But obviously, when I work with a couple, I usually want to do video so I can see their body language.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I have a whole bunch of different free gifts as well on my website, both for I have a free video training for couples on how to transform conflict into intimacy. I also have an ebook for women called Manifest Lasting Love, which has a 5-step formula for how to share your feelings with him in a way that's not making him wrong, that's likely to lead to a productive conversation instead of an argument. So I think and then I have another free gift, heal your I forget exactly what I call it because it's an ebook on I call it healthy love. It's basically how to heal your unhelpful patterns so that you're available for intimacy. And I give in that book a 5-step process to do the inner work that we talked about, how to challenge limiting beliefs, how to feel feelings in the body, how to determine what you need, how to find a different way to get your need met, including meeting your own need, and how to identify your emotional wounds so that you can then give yourself what you need within those and know how to talk about them. And so that is also a free gift on my website. So if you go to my website and you go under the free gifts tab, you'll see all those there. And that's the best way to get an idea of my work. Of course, I also do one-on-one coaching, and you can find that out about on my website as well.
Well, all that's going to be in the show notes. I want to thank you very much for joining me today. And when I go downstairs to see if my husband did what I asked him to do, I'm going to be prepared. And if he didn't do it, just find another nice way to ask him to follow up.
Exactly. Oh my God. I know it's funny. My husband likes to say, like, sometimes I just need to be reminded it's not nagging. It's like it's about like collaboration and attunement. And I think I feel really touched hearing that.
Very good. Thank you very much. It was wonderful having you today. Take
Yeah,
care.
you're welcome. And you too. And my
Bye-bye.
pleasure.